If there is just pain, Yuji Itadori will not stop. Now, today we're discussing Kaisen, the case for Jujutsu Kaisen, and why I want you all to check it out. Now, first off, I'm just going to tell you right now, in my opinion, Yuji Itadori, the main character of the series, is actually an A-class main character. It's always important to have an MC that you can actually enjoy. Now, the thing that I like about Yuji is that he is a dumb MC. However, he is not so nauseatingly dumb that you kind of wonder how he puts his pants on. Like, there's a couple of guys out there, I'm not going to name them, but they're pretty dumb, and you wonder how they get anything done ever based on the level of stupid they display. So, Yuji is realistically dumb, but he's also self-aware about that to a degree that like keeps him in check and allows him not to, overstate himself. He's also one of the things that a lot of manga could do is they keep main characters a little more simple so that they can be relatable. And yet, I don't find Yuji to be someone who's overly simplistic. He is set to have a fighting style that's more simple, which is just hands. But the structure of the series is that Yuji is kind of an anomaly amongst humans, and he ends up fitting in better because of how physically gifted he is. And in the process of it, though, he goes through, or I should say, his character arc within the first 6 chapters of the series is actually about as much development within 6 chapters as some main characters get throughout hundreds. We get the idea of him taking on a mission or somebody's request of him and their dying will, only for him to really think about what it means to live a life nobly, to live and die the way he chooses, which is something that most characters aren't necessarily focused around. We have a main character who's essentially set to die, and all he's doing is not necessarily prolonging his execution, but rather he is making sure that when he is executed, it is done optimally. So the goal of the series is not necessarily to become the biggest or the strongest, it's just to be strong enough to achieve the goals. He's much more in line with Ichigo in that regard, where he's a person who's just thrust into the supernatural world, forced to deal with these elements, and just rises to the occasion because he was born stronger and happens to be able to be compatible with it. Yes, with Ichigo, his family ended up being from this whole situation, but it's the same ultimately, because they're born with that power, he's just dragged into the situation, and he's just dragged into it because of some occult club activities that his friends were getting into at school. Now, one of the other strengths of the series, besides just having an A-class main character, and I do mean literally letter grade A, right now Yuji is an A-grade character. The reference that I made earlier was in regards to an event that happens during a fight where he's taken on some injuries, but he's still going. In general, Jujutsu Kaisen actually has a more condensed roster. This ends up playing into its advantage, in my opinion, because you have characters such as Yuji, Megumi, Nobara, Gojo, and already those are like the main 4 people that you're actually keeping up with. And then we have a couple of characters that come and go, but for the most part, if they're around, they have a consistent arc, or people who are going to be consistently there, and they cycle through in their roles or within the story, so that we don't ever spend too much time away from them. But their narrative function is that it justifies the roster and the main focus of the story being smaller. We are introduced to characters like Toto later on who come and go, but Toto's just a delight. And anybody who's watching this video knows why I'm laughing and smiling, because Toto is a man who can be filled with the memories that did not happen upon hearing the right answers to certain questions. And so the other thing to kind of let you know about is that all the characters are just a little to a lot crazy. There's the natural kind of nutsness that kind of goes into dealing with curses and apparitions that like to willingly get involved in that. And the reason why they say that is because ultimately it's just a guaranteed you're eventually going to die kind of situation, just constantly being in conflict with supernatural entities. But in general, there's lots of moments where they snap in some way, or they go like, oh, you can tell that their sanity is just a little questionable, But that's also one of the things that Gojo states, who's the sensei character, that he's looking for within them. That's my personal favorite character is Megumi Fushiguro, and so the power system of Jujutsu Kaisen revolves around cursed energy. You gotta bring this up because the way curses work is that they are essentially the manifestation of ideals, or necessarily resentment and hostilities and negative emotions coalesce into a point. What this does for the series is allow for one, if it wants to be like a high scaling power, it's justified. If you run into a randomly low level enemy, it still makes sense. It's all in proportion to what the humans in that area would necessarily resent. Recently, we had Yuji take on a grasshopper curse, and it was more or less based around the fear of the grasshopper and locusts coming and eating their crops and etc. So he was a decently strong curse that was capable of speech, etc. You have one of the main villains is actually a human's curse, and he comes into existence due to the resentment and fears, etc. that humans harbor towards other humans. And so we have these sentient apparitions that are essentially the manifestations of negative emotions that come into play, and at any point, whatever curse happens to come into existence, as long as its power level is reasonable, it'll make sense due to the fact that there are many things that we as people fear, resent, hate, and have negative emotions towards. They even specify that schools, hospitals, and cemeteries are places where it is very likely to find curses due to the fact that people have so much negative emotions that are tied to those places. So from the way that the villains are structured, which, by the way, the villains have their own actual goals. Some of the curses within their sentience decide they want to be the dominant species, essentially, and they don't want humans to exist anymore. Some of the people feel like if you can't use cursed energy, if you're not a Jujutsu user or a curse, you don't need to exist, because curses only exist because of people who cannot use Jujutsu sorcery. There's a lot of tricks that go into, and in addition to that, one of the things that I really like is that I like how, for example, in My Hero Academia, it plays with the trope of people yelling their attacks out and weaves it into the canonical story and makes it where it's about how your superpowers, your super moves are a marketing tool, a way to get people to pay attention to you. So when the kids want to imitate you, they're like, oh yeah, Flash Fire Fist, da-da-da. Like, it has a purpose in addition to that, your allies knowing the name. It's a way to actually inspire people. That checks out. Here, one of the tropes that is utilized heavily but to a great effect is the expositing what your abilities do trope. Now, one of the reasons why this trope comes to be is because it's necessary to explain abilities. However, in Jujutsu Kaisen, explaining your abilities to your opponent makes them more effective. The reason why this is completely justified is if hunting curses, and curses are the manifestation of negative thoughts, feelings, etc., that means that directly the mind state of the people is attached to the power of the curse. Therefore, the person you're fighting, their curse will become more effective the more aware of it you are, because you'll focus in and ultimately feed into it on a mental level. So that explanation that aspect of the series leads to anytime you have a character that explains their ability to someone. There's even a character that goes out so far as to say, I can explain it to this opponent because it doesn't matter due to their intelligence level, but it still makes it more effective ultimately because it's still a curse that's explained. Or you can explaining it just because it becomes more effective because the opponent is more dangerous, and the power boost might be worth more than necessarily keeping your ability a secret. So that's something that's woven into the combat system. And then in addition to that, everybody that uses abilities has like an innate one. And so you get into the realm of you have your base ability that you're born with, that for Fushiguro, for example, is the Ten Shikigami. Nobara has resonance, which essentially allows her to turn voodoo dolls, create voodoo dolls on the fly and launch nails, in addition to having them expand within targets. There's Gojo Satoru, who has the Six Eyes and the Limitless, which the Limitless allows for essentially when people attack him, instead of attacking him and making contact with him, they touch the infinity in between them. If that doesn't sound like it makes complete sense, that's because you kind of have to read Jujutsu Kaisen to get the context and see the application, but that's literally what it is. You touch the infinity between you two. and he creates impossible scenarios such as having -1 apples. So the thing about abilities is a lot of them. There's a chain of unique abilities, and because they're innate, and you're born with them for the most part, most people, you will not see a lot of duplicates of characters' abilities throughout the series, and if you do, it's because they're related or there's a contextual explanation, such as there's literally an ability called Heaven's Restriction that certain characters have that goes through a bloodline. And so there's some of the more popular powers have handbooks, as it's explained later, and so people know like some of the secrets, whereas some of the lesser known ones people are not prepared for as much. Or some people's jujutsu shiki, it can be as simple as clapping their hands and causing an effect. And some people's power is, they have to analyze you, and then it divides your body into 10 segments, and then with the 7-3 split decides that that's a weak point on the target. So the essentially the jujutsu abilities are kind of like stand abilities in the way they range from uniqueness. So you get the JoJo satisfaction of the range of abilities. You get it actually makes sense, and these behaviors line up with what the story has presented us, so that we know we're not constantly getting weird. This is exposition for the sake of exposition kind of dialogue. It's all woven within the story, where it has a direct impact on how these characters are going to interact, fight each other, etc. In addition to that, Jujutsu Kaisen's humor is very down to earth. It has a very meme-esque aspect to it, to the degree where there's a 70% chance that if anybody starts a Twitter read-through of Jujutsu Kaisen, they will post a particular page of the main character Yuji with a guy named Toto, and they're both striking the same pose. Almost everyone who does a Jujutsu Kaisen read-through ends up posting that page because it's so perfect and just kind of like a goofy but at the same time intense moment. And so we've got, and the thing is, it's only 87 chapters in, so it's not the largest catch-up if you decide you want to start reading this. The arcs are usually missions, so you can read them in chunks. If you read like 6 chapters, they're not long. He's very much like Horikoshi in that he does mostly short arcs that are ranging between like 6 to 12 chapters long. I don't even think there's been an arc that's been 12 chapters long yet. And so you get these structured arcs, these missions, because they go to hunt curses. You can have various events taking place, and then when you skip time, you can just like have like little skips. So you get these little improvements throughout the series that are justified because they haven't gone on a mission in a week, but they don't stop training, they still go to school, etc. So we know that they're always training anyway. So whenever we skip ahead a couple days, couple weeks, as long as it's racking up with powers or based on dialogue and foreshadowing, which is actually done really well, the way the characters talk about abilities with each other, and it kind of leads itself to where as people discover their powers are used in more flexible ways, you kind of realize, well, yes, this is what was talked about. And the final villain of this series is still actually a little unclear. It could be 3 different people right now, which I think is already a great decision. It could end up being none of them, but the fact that each of the 3 would be a villain and have a certain level of interest, or the same level of intriguing, but all 3 of them have very different motivations, I think is a testament to Gage's writing. And if I'm being honest, currently in Shonen Jump, Jujutsu Kaisen has some of the best fights as far as the way they're choreographed, from the way that the characters move as they're drawn in panels, to the way that the motion is done, and the spacing, where sometimes the same character will appear at the same panel multiple times, but you can tell because of the setup and the layout of it that he's still in motion, without even using lots of typical, like, oh, I drew an arrow kind of motion. So you can just tell based on the way the person's body is positioned and the distance between the foreground and the background. So Gage puts together lovely fights that what I can say is that the art style and the combat style and the way that people fight and get in each other's faces, and because Yuji was a track star and he actually kind of moves like he's doing hurdles and things like that, it has sometimes the art looks what I would call scrappy in a good way, where the lines get like a little more intense, or they get like a little more, they look more like sketch lines almost on the faces sometimes, but it's because they're just in motion, and that's kind of being conveyed very well. And So you have, in my opinion, the current best fights in Shonen Jump, better than My Hero's fights right now. Sorry, like, Gage is kind of a monster, and I love it. So if you guys like, if you liked Bleach, if you like action, if you like the action genre, especially, if you in general like, if you're reading Shonen Jump already, you got the Viz app. I say at least give the first couple chapters a shot. See what you think of it. You can currently read chapters 1 through 17 on Viz for free right now, and then there's a gap in the official for some reason, and then you go to chapters 40 and beyond. But I definitely recommend you guys checking out Jujutsu Kaisen. It's currently, in my opinion, the second best manga running in Shonen Jump, only besides My Hero Academia, and it's my third favorite manga running right now, only behind MHA and Attack on Titan. So if you want to see a bunch of people go a little nuts, go very hard in combat, and have interesting psyches and journeys and the way they interlap with each other and look out for each other, then Jujutsu Kaisen is the manga for you. And so I highly recommend you check that out. And with all that being said, it's on the channel now. I'm going to be reviewing it anyway. So, hey, just give it a shot. Maybe you'll like it. It's anime starting in 2020, so this is a good time to get ahead before it blows up as an anime, and then a bunch of people read the manga, and then manga fans start spoiling you because you're trying to watch the anime. Thanks, K and Y. Have a good day.